morning. Today we are starting our next chapter, chapter 9. We're going from Civil War to now the War of the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. So there were two wars going on at the same time. We're going to be learning about that. To start us off, we're going to talk about our key terms we need to know for our chapter. So our first key term is agency. What is an agency, Paul? Oh my, we are not calibrated at all. So let me calibrate us real quick.
When you say calibrate, it's a real line.
Okay, let's try this again. So you said the agency was a field office, right? A U.S. government field office. So a U.S. government field office. And we've talked about different agencies over these chapters, like the the Indian Affairs Agency. They would have somebody who would be overseeing the American Indian relations. So we're going to see some more talk about that important position. Our next one is the traditional Dakota. You'll see we have two different types of Dakota Indians that we're going to be learning about. Who can tell me what the traditional Dakota, how they lived? Peyton?
Dakota who wanted to maintain their culture and resist efforts to make them live like European Americans.
So the traditional Dakota were the ones who lived traditionally. So they were the Dakota who wanted to maintain their culture and resist efforts to make them live like European Americans. What term do we call that when we try to make somebody live like the bigger group, Molly? Assimilation. So these were the Dakota that were fighting against assimilation. They didn't want to be like the European Americans. They wanted to be like their Dakota ancestors. They didn't want to change their way of life. They wanted to stay living how they live. Ryan, do you need something? If there isn't a box out, grab one out of the purple cupboard or the pineapple cupboard. So the traditional Dakota wanted to hold on to their traditional ways. Oh, Ryan, thank you. All right, so we have traditional Dakota, then we have farm Dakota. How did the farm Dakota live? Chase?
They adopted some ways of European Americans.
They were the Dakota who adopted some European American ways. Including farming like settlers. Does that mean that traditional Dakota never farmed?
No.
They farmed. Remember, they, like the Dakota and the Ojibwe, they had their farms, but they had like the spring going to the sugar camp. where they had the sugar cane. They had the summer, going to the summer camp where they would set up those farms. And then in the fall, they would go to the rice. Got that right? Yeah, sugar camp was in the spring. So they were moving around. They didn't stay in one place all year and just farm that land only. So the farm Dakota started living they started assimilating more to the settlers. They're saying, well, we're on this reservation, we're stuck here, so let's learn from the settlers and take on some of their ways of living. Since we have to live on the reservation, let's adjust and change with the times, become more like those around us. Put the scissors away, please. Away, please. So if we know that there's going to be a war between the U.S. and the Dakota, that's the name of the chapter, any guesses, any educated guesses on what the war might be about? What do you think, Edward?
I think it's going to be about the territory that they only holds because they want more.
That the settlers want more territory? The Indians are regretting giving up as much land as they did. Maybe they want some of that land back. Okay, Colin, what do you think?
I think it's like the U.S. is like fighting against the Dakota who don't assimilate.
Oh, maybe the U.S. is attacking the Dakota who aren't assimilating and are trying to live traditionally, because we know that the U.S. government had expected the American Indians to assimilate. They set up those education programs to make them become more like the white settlers. What do you think, Andrea?
I think the Dakota are attacking on the Americans.
Why?
Because they're sick of the life that they have to do now, and they want to go back to their old ways.
Okay, maybe the Dakota are attacking because they don't like the new lifestyle and they want to be able to live how they used to live. Okay. These are some things that we're going to be learning about in this chapter. What is causing this war? What are they fighting over? Why are they fighting? And how it turns out. We do have two more key terms. Our next one is an internment camp. Paul?
A place where civilians prisoners of war
So it's a place where civilians, prisoners of war, and or political prisoners are held. Internment camps have been used a lot in history. What? We did use them in World War II. Do you know who the U.S. put into internment camps during World War II, Edward? Molly? The Japanese. Because the Japanese were the ones who bombed Pearl Harbor. The country of Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And then people living in the United States became scared of any Japanese people that were living in the U.S. now. They thought they might be spies. So they were scared of any more attacks. So they set up internment camps, and we sent them to these camps. They had to leave their homes, and they had to live in these camps until the war was done. Then they were allowed to go back to their homes. Colin?
I thought it was like where they kept the Christians.
Not the Christians, Jews.
Oh, the Jews. That's a concentration.
Yep. So that is another type of camp. That's a concentration camp. Internment camps are short term, and they have a higher standard of living. The concentration camps in World War II that Germany had set up, those were not a good place to go. They killed people. They worked people to death. People were sick. They didn't have food. They lived in horrible conditions. Internment camps were a step above that. They were living in decent enough conditions. They had tents that they lived in. It wasn't home. So it's not a nice place to be. You don't want to go to an internment camp because it's not your home. and it's humiliating having to leave where you're supposed to be, and it's not good, but it was not as horrible as the concentration camp. So there's differing levels. Edward?
How many do you think they caught in this time?
I don't really think they had spies in the U.S. I think there was just a great fear that there were spies. I honestly, I mean, I'm sure there were spies from, there's always spies, but I don't believe that they caught a lot of spies from doing the internment camps. That was mostly out of fear. So after 9/11, we had talked about 9/11 at the beginning of the year. There was a lot of fear against Middle Eastern people because they were the ones who flew the planes into the buildings. So there was a great fear of Muslims and of Middle Eastern people. Just because there's one group who does something bad doesn't mean everybody that's like them is bad. But there is a natural fear that people have when something bad does happen. So it happened with the Japanese. People were afraid because, oh my goodness, look at what they did. They attacked us. They didn't realize, I mean, we had Japanese Americans who were fighting for the U.S. in the Army or in the armed services. So they're fighting for our country, and then their families back home were being moved into internment camps. So people really need to stop themselves from living in that fear of, and just get different perspectives on things. All right, our last word is exile. Julian. To force to leave one's country or homeland. Now, the Dakota live in Minnesota. The United States lives in Minnesota. So I'm curious to see how exile turns up in this chapter, because this is our home. It was the Dakota home. So to force to leave one's country or homeland, we're going to find out what kind of exile was happening.
Is this like a question about like this entire chapter? I know this isn't like Minnesota, but does this take place during like the time of like where Custer invaded, like or like that
No.
stuff? No.
No.
Okay.
This, I'm trying to think. Custer's Last Stand. I'm trying to think of what war that was.
Yeah, I think yeah.
Well, yes, but what war was it, is what I'm trying to think.
General Custer. He was like.
You have General Custer. It was a big battle down in New Mexico.
Like American or what?
Yeah. It was an American Indian U.S. war. Was that the French and Indian War?
No.
A different name. So in Clue, it's Colonel Mustard. This is General Custer. So they're rhyming. Not the man from Clue. Oh, that was the Civil War. So General Custer fought in the Civil War and the American Indian Wars. So it is the same time period. So you were right that it's the same time period, different war. Okay? So there were a lot of battles between the U.S. and the American Indians. We're going to be learning specifically about the Dakota because that's here in Minnesota. But there were other wars with other Indian nations because the Indians were being forced to change their lifestyle, to assimilate, and they didn't want to. They were being forced to go through that trail of tears that we learned about a couple of chapters ago. They were forced to leave their lands and it was not good. So they were fighting back, which sometimes when we fight back, we don't always pick the right way to fight back. So there was a lot of things happening at this time. So we had the Civil War, and then we had trouble with between the relations between the United States and the American Indians. So we will be learning about it. I don't believe we're learning specifically about General Custer, but it is the same time period, which makes sense because that this is the time that the Indians were trying to survive and hold on to some of their way of life. Paul.
So we're not. So are we gonna learn about any other generals in this chapter, or people who helped out the Dakota?
We're gonna find out. Okay, so this whole chapter is about this war of 1862, the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. So we're gonna find out what that all entailed. So I'm assuming we'll find out some people. I don't know if it's going to be big focus on certain people like the last chapter was with Eliza Winston and the Scotts and Robert Hickman, but we're going to be learning about what happened. I don't know if there were specific people that played as big of a role. Sam.
Oh, I just skimmed through it. It doesn't look like it says much about just main people. It's just
Yeah, it's more of the idea of what was going on and why it was happening. That's the most important thing, is to understand the different perspectives of the U.S. government, of the settlers, of the Dakota. Peyton.
So when will we start learning about that kind of stuff, like Little Big Horn and stuff like that?
So that would be American history. So 6th grade, it's just Minnesota history. So I think in 7th grade, you do more world history and some American history. At my old school, we learned American history in 5th grade. So I don't know if you guys did some last year.
Yeah, we did.
And I know in high school, you have a whole year that's on U.S. history. In Anoka Hennepin, they do it in 10th grade.
Okay.
So in 10th grade, the whole year is just about American history.
Alright.
So you'll definitely learn a lot more about it in high school. Paul.
So I think Henry Sibley is gonna be a big part of this because of the Dakota and Church.
Okay. So we'll find out if some of these people that we learned about in the past that were big about getting Minnesota to go into a territory to become a state, if they play a part in, it would make sense that they would play a role in this because they were big leaders in Minnesota. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say goodbye to my friends at home. We are staying still at our spots in the classroom. So we hope everyone at home is well, and we see you soon.